Hi everybody, welcome to another Storytime with Sid. It is me, Sidney of Hightower. Who else? Your local face storyteller that is here to give you guys another story. And before we get started today, I wanted to say something that's I've been thinking about for a while, and I think I finally have I don't know if it's audacity or courage or right to say something. But I've had a few people reach out to me over the past few weeks, talking about how much these stories mean to them, and how they actually look forward to watching them every week. And, in the beginning, this was something that I was just doing to make the best out of a not so great situation, and now knowing that it actually does help people, it really just means the world. So for everyone who watches every week, or if you're just stopping in for one, I just want to say I appreciate you so much, and thank you for being here, because this helps me just as much as it helps you. Now, I have a really interesting story for us today. It's one that I've never heard of before, as most of them are, but this is called The Wind Tells of Valdemaar Daae and His Daughters, which is very interesting because that's a very specific name. I've never heard of it before, so they must be very important. And I'm very excited to read to you. So, this is The Wind Tells of Valdemaar Daae and His Daughters. When the wind runs across the grass, the blades ripple like a pond. When it runs across the field, the grain billows like a lake. That's the dance of the wind. But listen to it speak. It sings the words out loud, and the sound is different in the trees of the forest than through the holes, cracks, and crevices of the wall. Can you see how the wind up there is chasing the clouds as if they were a flock of sheep? Can you hear how the wind down here is sobbing through the open gate as if it were a watchman blowing his horn? How odd the way it rushes down the chimney and into the stove. The fire flares up and the spark shining far into the room. It's so warm and snug to sit here and listen to it. Just let the wind speak. It knows tales and stories more than all the rest of us put together. Listen now to the way it speaks. Hooah! Pass it on. And that's the refrain of the song. So, I'm speaking as the wind now. Near the great belt there's an old manor house with thick red walls, says the wind. I know every stone. I saw it in the past when it was a part of Mark VI's castle on the headland. It had to come down. The stones rose up to become a new wall, a new estate, a different place. That was Borreby Manor, which stands there today. I've seen and know all the high-born gentlemen and ladies, the different families who have resided there. Now, I'm going to tell you about Valdemaar Daae and his daughters. He held his head so proudly. He was of royal lineage. He could do more than hunt a stag and empty a tankard. Everything will turn out fine, he would say. His wife, straight-backed in a silk gown shot with gold threads, gilded along her polished parquet floor. The tapestries were magnificent, the furniture costly and artfully carved, silverware and gold she had brought to the house. German beer was stored in the cellar where beer was to be had, and fiery black horses snored in the stable. There were great riches at Borreby Manor while the wealth lasted. And there were 3 children, 3 elegant maidens, Ida, Joanna, and Anna Dorothea. I can still remember their names. They were wealthy people, refined people, born into glory and raised into it. Hooah! Pass it on, says the wind, and then resumed its story. There I never saw, as I did in the old manors, the high-born mistress sitting in the great hall with her maids, turning and spinning the wheel. She played a lilting lute and sang along, though not always the old Danish folk ballads, but rather songs in foreign tongues. The house was lively and festive. Distinguished guests came from far and near. Music played, goblets clinked. I couldn't drown them out, said the wind. There was an arrogance beyond all measure, noble folks, but not our Lord. Then, one evening of May Day, said the wind, I came from the west. I had seen ships smashed to wrecks in the west coast of Jutland. I had raced over the heath and the forest green shore, and across the island of Finn, and then across the great belt, soaring and roaring. Then I laid down to rest on the coast of Shawland, close to Borreby Manor, where the forest stood with glorious oaks. The young men from the region came there to gather boughs and branches, the biggest and driest they could find. They took them to town, placed them in a heap, and set fire to it. Then the girls and young men danced around the fire, singing. I lay still, said the wind, but I gently moved one branch, the one that had been put by there by the most handsome of men. His wood flared up, flared highest of all. He was the chosen one, awarded the title and proclaimed the May King. He chose from among the girls his little May Queen. There was joy and merriment greater than inside the rich Borreby Manor. And approaching the manor, in a golden carriage drawn by 6 horses, came the noble mistress and her 3 daughters, so elegant, so young, 3 enchanting flowers, Rose, Lily, and the pale hyacinth. Their mother was a resplendent tulip. No one person in the whole world did she greet, and they stopped their games to curtsy and bow. You'd almost think the mistress was brittle like a stalk. Rose, Lily, and the pale hyacinth, yes, I saw all 3. I thought to myself, whose May Queen will they be some day? Their May King, a proud king, perhaps a prince? Hoo-ha, pass it on, pass on. Yes, the carriage rushed off with them, and the peasant folk rushed back to the dance. Preparations were made for the summer in the town near Borreby, near Terreby, and all the surrounding towns. But that night, when I rose up, said the wind, the high-born mistress lay down, never to rise again. It came upon her as it comes upon all humans. It's nothing new. For a brief moment, Valdemaar Daae stood there, solemn, pensive. The proudest tree may be bowed but never broken, he heard a voice say inside of him. His daughters wept, and the manor everyone wiped their eyes. But Mistress Daae had passed on, and I passed on. Oh, said the wind. I went back. I went back often across the island of Finn and the waters of the great belt. I sat down on Borreby Strand near the magnificent oak forest. There the osprey, the wood dove, and the blue raven, and even the black stork built their nests. It was early in the year. Some had eggs, and some had fledglings. Oh, how they flew, how they shrieked. The crash of axes could be heard, blow after blow. The forest was going to be felled. Valdemaar Daae wanted to build a costly ship, a man-of-war, with 3 foredecks, which the king was certain to buy. That's why the forest had to fall. That landmark for the sailors, that home for the birds. The shrike flew off in terror. Its nest was destroyed. The osprey and all the birds of the forest lost their homes. They flew around in confusion, shrieking in fear and in anger. I understood them well. Crows and jackdaws jeered loudly, "Gone the nest! Gone the nest! Gone! Gone!" And in the middle of the forest, near the crowd of workers, stood Valdemaar Daae and his 3 daughters. They were all laughing at the wild screams of the birds. But his younger daughter, Anna Dorothea, felt pity in her heart. They were also going to fell a half-dead tree on whose bare branches the black stork had built its nest, and the little fledglings were poking out their heads. She pleaded for them, pleaded with tears in her eyes, and so the tree was allowed to stay, keeping its nest for the black stork. It was a mere trifle. They chopped and they sawed. A ship was built with 3 foredecks. The master builder was of lowly lineage, but of noble countenance. His eyes and brow revealed how wise he was, and Valdemaar Daae liked to hear his stories, as did little Ida, the eldest daughter a girl of 15. And while he built the ship for her father, he built for himself a dream castle in which he and little Ida lived as man and wife. That might have happened if only the castle had been made of mortared stone and ramparts and trenches, woods and gardens. But for all his shrewdness, the master builder was still an impoverished bird. And what place does a sparrow have in a crane's mating dance? Oh, I flew away, and he flew away, for he didn't dare stay. And little Ida recovered from it, because recover she must. In the stable snorted black horses, worth seeing, and seen they were. The admiral was sent by the king himself to take a look at the new man-of-war and discuss its purchase. He spoke in loud admiration of the fiery horses. "I heard it for myself," said the wind. "I followed the gentlemen through the open door and spread the straw like rods of gold before their feet. Gold was what Valdemaar Daae wanted. The admiral wanted the black horses, for he praised them so highly. But this was not understood, and so the ship was never sold. It stood and gleamed at the shore, covered with planks, a Noah's ark that never entered the water. Oh, pass it on, pass it on. What a pity that was. In the winter time, when the fields lay under snow, drift ice filled the strait, and I packed against the shore," said the wind. "Ravens and crows arrived, each one blacker than the last, in huge flocks. They landed on the desolate, that dead, that lonely ship at the shore, and screamed their hoarse cries at the forest that was gone. The many precious birds' nests that had been destroyed, the homeless old ones, the homeless young, and all for the sake of this great junk heap, this proud vessel that would never sail. I whirled the snow into drifts. The snow lay like great swells rising high on all sides, rising over it. I let it hear my voice, what a storm has to say. I know I did my utmost to give the knowledge a ship should have. Oh, pass it on." And winter passed on. Both winter and summer passed on. They race by and they pass on, just as I raced by, just as the snow drifts, the apple blossom drifts, and the leaf falls. Pass on, pass on, pass on. So too must human beings. But the daughters were still young. Little Ida arose as lovely to look at when the shipbuilders saw her. Often I would seize hold of her long brown tresses when she stood at the garden near the apple tree, lost in thought, not noticing that I was sprinkling blossoms into her hair, which had come undone. And she gazed at the red sun and the golden backdrop of the sky between the dark shrubs and the trees of the garden. Her sister was like a lily, shimmering and straight. Joanna, her bearing noble and erect, and like her mother, a brittle stalk. She took pleasure in walking through the great hall where the ancestral portraits hung. The ladies were painted wearing velvet and silk with tiny pearl-studded caps on their plaited hair. What beautiful ladies! Their husbands wore steel, costly coats, lined with squirrel skin with blue pleated ruffs. Their swords were fastened to their thigh and not to their waist. Where would Joanna's portrait one day hang on the wall? How would her noble husband look? Yes, that's what she thought about. That's what she chattered about. I heard it as I passed through the long corridor into the hall, and then turned around. Anna Dorothea, the pale hyacinth, a mere child of 14, was quiet and pensive. Her big, blue, pale eyes looked thoughtful, but a childish smile played on her lips. I could not blow it away, nor did I wish to. I met her in the garden, on the sunken road and in the self-tended fields. She was gathering herbs and flowers, the ones she knew that her father could use in potions and tinctures he was distilling. Valdemaar Daae was arrogant and proud, but also skillful and possessed great knowledge. People had taken note of this and were much to talk about. The fire burned in his hearth even in summer. His chamber door was locked. This went on for days and nights, but he said very little about it. The forces of nature must be quietly explored. Soon he would discover the very best. Red gold. That's why steam poured from the hearth. That's why it crackled, it blazed. Oh yes, I was there, said the wind. Let it go, let it go. I sang through the chimney. It will be nothing but smoke, soot, embers, and ashes. You'll burn yourself up. Oh, pass it on, pass it on. But Valdemaar Daae did not let it go. The magnificent horses in the stable, what happened to them? And what about the old silverware and gold in the cupboards and bowers and cows in the fields and the lands and estate? Well, they could be melted in the gold crucible, and yet no gold appears. There was nothing left in the barn or the storerooms, in the cellar or attic, fewer servants, more mice. Our window pane shattered. Another cracked. It no longer had to go through the door, said the wind. When the chimney is smoking, a meal is cooking, and the chimney smoked, the one that devours all meals, for the sake of red gold. I blew through the castle gate like a watchman blowing its horn, but there was no watchman, said the wind. I spun the weather vane on the steeple. It creaked as if the watchman were snoring on the tower, but there was no watchman. There were rats and mice. Poverty set the table. Poverty sat in the wardrobe and in the pantry. The door came off its hinges. Cracks and crevices appeared. I went out and I went in, said the wind, and that's why I know all about it. In smoke and ashes, in sorrow and sleepless nights, the hair in his beard and on his brow turned gray, the skin grimy and yellow, his eyes so greedy for gold. Long-awaited gold. I blew smoke and ashes into his face and beard. Debts appeared instead of gold. I sang through the broken panes and open cracks, blew at his daughter's sleeping branches where their clothes lay faded and threadbare because they had to last forever. That song was not sung at the cradle of these children. The noble life became a wretched life. I was the only one who sang aloud in the castle, said the wind. I snowed the men because it's said to bring warmth. They had no firewood. The forest where they should have found wood had been felled. It was bitter frost. I swung through sound holes and corridors, over gables and walls to keep myself brisk. Inside they lay their beds because of the cold, those noble daughters. Their father crept under the hide coverlet, nothing to bite, nothing to burn. That's the noble life. Ooh, pass it on. But Sir Daae could not. After the winter comes spring, he said. After bad times come good, but they're long overdue, long overdue. Now the manor has been mortgaged. Now it's time of our greatest need, and so the gold will come at Easter, he thought. I heard him muttering to the spider's web. You clever little weaver. You taught me to keep going. If your web is torn apart, you start over and complete it. Torn apart again, and undismayed you set to work from the beginning. The beginning. That's what a person has to do. And he will be rewarded. It was Easter morning. The bells chimed. The sun played in the sky. Burning with fever, he had kept a vigil, boiling and cooling, mixing and distilling. I heard him sigh like a desperate soul. I heard him pray. I could sense that he was holding his breath. I blew on the charcoal embers. They shone on his chalk-white face. It took a tinge of color. His eyes were squinting in their deep sockets, but now they grew bigger, bigger, as if they would burst. Look at that alchemical flask. Something is shining inside. It's gleaming, pure and heavy. He lifted it up with his trembling hand and shouted in a trembling tongue, Gold! Gold! And with that, he grew faint. I could have blown him over, said the wind. But I merely blew on the glowing coals and followed him through the door where his daughters sat freezing. His coat was covered with ashes. They hung in his beard and his tangled hair. He drew himself up tall, lifted his precious treasure in the fragile flask. Him discovered, recovered, gold! He cried, holding high the flask which sparkled in the sunlight. But his hand shook, and the flask dropped to the floor and shattered into 1,000 pieces. burst was the last bubble of his well-being. Oh, pass it on. And I rushed from the alchemist's manor. Late in the year, when the days are short up here, when the fog arrives with its dish rag and rings wet drops onto the red berries and leafless branches, I arrived in a cheerful mood to air things out. I blew the air clean and snapped off rotten branches, and that's not a huge task, but it has to be done. There were things swept clean in another way at Borby Manor, the home of Valdemaar Daae. His enemy, O. Ramel from Basnaes, had come with the purchased mortgage deed in hand for the estate and all of its contents. I drummed on the broken window panes, slammed into the ramshackle doors, whistled through the cracks and crevices. Hooey! Sir Ove would have no desire to stay there. Ida and Anna Dorothea wept brave tears. Joanna stood straight-backed, pale, chewing on her thumb until it bled. What good would that do? O. Ramel granted Sir Daae permission to stay at the manor for the rest of his life, but he won no thanks for this offer. I was listening. I saw the landless gentleman raise his head even prouder, giving it a toss. And I blew a gust at the estate and the old linden trees, breaking the thickest branch in half, though it wasn't even rotten. It lay in the front of the gate like a broom. If anyone wanted to do any sweeping, and sweep they did. I thought as much. It was a hard day, a bitter hour to endure, but the will was stubborn, the neck was stiff. Not a thing did they possess but the clothes on their backs. Oh yes, the alchemical flask that had been recently purchased and filled with scrapings from what had spilled on the floor, the promised treasure that had failed to last. Valdemaar Daae hid it inside his waistcoat, then took his stick in his hand, made the once rich gentleman and his 3 daughters, left Borby Manor. I blew cold air on his hot cheeks. I caressed his gray beard and his long white hair. I sang the only way I know how. Who? Pass it on, pass it on. That was the end of their rich splendor. Ida and Anna Dorothea walked on either side of him. Joanna turned around at the gate. What good was that? Their fortunes were not about to turn. She looked at the red stones in the wall that came from Mark Stig's castle, and she thought about his daughters. The eldest took the youngest hand, and they set off into the wide world. She thought about that song. Here were the 3 of them. Their father was with them, too. They were walking along the road they had once traveled in a carriage. They were setting off as beggars with their father to Smidstrup Field, to the mud and wattle hovel they had leased for 10 marks a year. Their new manor house with empty walls and empty vessels. Crows and jackdaws flew above them, screeching as if in spite. Gone the nest! Gone the nest! Gone! Gone! Just as the birds had screeched in Borby Forest where the trees were felled. Sir Daae and his daughters certainly heard it, but I blew hard at their ears. It wasn't worth hearing. Then they went inside, the mud and wattle hovel at Smidstrup Field, and I rushed across the bog and the field through naked hedges and plucked forest to open waters and other lands. Who, pass on, and keep on, for years and years. What happened to Valdemaar Daae? What happened to his daughter? The wind says. The last I saw of them, yes, the very last, it was Anna Dorothea, the pale hyacinth, but then she was old and bowed. It was half a century later. She lived the longest. She knew the whole story. Over there on the heath, near the town of Viborg, stood the dean's stately new manor with red stones and a steeped gable. Thick smoke rose from the chimney. The gentle mistress and her fair daughters sat in the bay window and gazed out over the gardens, drooping boxthorn out towards the brown heath. What were they looking for? They were looking for the stork's nest out there on the tumble-down house. The roof was covered with moss and house leaks. What was left of the roof? It was a stork's nest that provided the most cover, and it was the only thing that had been mended. The stork left it in good repair. It was a house to be looked at, but not touched. I had to move cautiously, said the wind. For the sake of the stork's nest, the house was allowed to stand. Otherwise, it was an eyesore on the heath. But the dean didn't want to chase the stork away, so the hovel was allowed to remain, and the poor person inside was permitted to live there. For that she could thank the Egyptian bird. Or was it gratitude, because she had pleaded for the nest of the wild black brother in Borreby Forest? Back then the poor thing was a young girl, an elegant, pale hyacinth in the noble garden. She remembered it all, Aunt Dorothea. Oh, yes, human beings can sigh just like the wind does through the reeds and rushes. Oh, no bells tolled over your grave, Valdemaar Daae. The poor schoolboys did not sing when the former lord of Borreby was laid in the earth. Oh, everything comes to end, even misery. Sister Ida became a peasant's wife. That was the harshest trial for our father. His daughter's husband was a wretched thrall, subject to the master's punishment to ride on the wooden horse. Surely by now he must be in his grave. And you as well, Ida. Oh, yes, yes. It is not yet over. Old wretch that I am, poor wretch that I am. Release me, mighty Christ, said Aunt Dorothea. And that was Aunt Dorothea's prayer in the pitiful hovel that was allowed to stand for the sake of the stork. The most spirited sister, I took care of myself, said the wind. She had clothes made to match the spirit that was hers at birth. She appeared as a poor lad that hired on with ship's captain, few in words, sullen in looks, but willing to do her job, although she could not climb. Then I blew her overboard before anyone found out she was a woman, and what a good thing that I did, said the wind. It was Easter morning, just like the time when Valdemaar Daae thought he had discovered red gold, when I heard beneath the stork's nest, beneath the flimsy walls, a hymn, Aunt Dorothea's last song. There was no window pane. There was merely a hole in the wall. The sun appeared, like a lump of gold, and settled there. How it glowed! Her eyes burst, her heart burst. They would have done so even if the sun had not shone on her that morning. The stork gave her a roof over her head until her death. I sang at her grave, said the wind. I sang at her father's grave. I know where it is and where hers is too. But no one else knows. New times, other times, old thoroughfares led to fenced fields, hollowed graves becoming frequented highways, and soon the steam engine will come with its string of cars and roar over the graves, forgotten just like the names. Hua, pass it on. And that's the story of Valdemaar Daae and his daughters. Go ahead and tell it better, the rest of you if you can, said the wind, and it turned away. It was gone. And that was The Wind Tells of Valdemaar Daae and His Daughters. That was a beautiful lesson. I think it is a somber tale, but even in somber tales you find morals and you can find little joys. I think the little joy in this one is that the wind felt so much love for that family and watched them grow and ultimately watch their demise. But the care that is in the wind when it runs through your hair and it topples you over and it puts wind under your wings. It's beautiful. It definitely proves that greed and obsession over one thing can cause so much distress for so many other people. And I hope that that's a lesson that people take to heart. Greed is a disease. And the wind was smart enough to realize that. It's interesting because the wind exists, of course, in both realms. And I think it definitely has a personality in both. You can catch so many sounds on the wind, so many hints, so many notes. It's a beautiful thing that we're blessed with to cool us down on our hottest days and to blow pollen and make trees grow. The wind is an amazing storyteller, an amazing friend. And I'm lucky I was able to tell a story that involved it so nicely today. Thank you so much for joining me. I had a wonderful time reading that story, and I hope you enjoy listening to it. Stay happy, healthy, and safe. I love you all.